The morning Vivienne Ashford-Crane drove her pearl-white 2021 Range Rover Sport over the edge of Raymond Kowalski's garden, she was wearing sunglasses that cost more than his monthly pension check. She didn't brake. She didn't look back. She just rolled down her window, examined a chip on her manicured nail, and said to nobody in particular, "That ugly thing was blocking my sightline anyway." What Vivienne Ashford-Crane did not know, what she couldn't have known because she had never once bothered to look, was that every single plant in that garden had a name. Not a flower name. A soldier's name. And the man who planted them had carried some of those soldiers home in body bags. Let me tell you about Sycamore Court. Not the Sycamore Court you'd find on a real estate listing, though if you had found it there sometime in the spring of 2019, the listing would have called it charming, would have said things like established neighborhood and mature trees and strong community feel, and for once, the listing wouldn't have been lying. Sycamore Court was a cul-de-sac on the eastern edge of Harrowfield, Ohio, a small city about 40 minutes south of Columbus, nested between rolling farmland and the kind of quiet that city people drive 2 hours to find on weekends. 8 houses on that street, all of them brick or colonial painted wood, all of them with American flags, not the small, polite flags people put out on the 4th of July and forget, but full-sized, properly lit, properly mounted flags that flew 365 days a year, the kind of flags that meant something to the people who hung them. The sidewalks were clean, the lawns were trimmed. On summer evenings, people sat on their porches and waved at each other and meant it. Mrs. Patricia Acaffer at number 4 would leave homemade jollof rice on doorsteps when someone had a hard week. The Delgado boys at number 7 would shovel every driveway on the street after a snowfall without being asked. Frank Merritt at number 2 had a workshop in his garage and fixed neighbors' lawnmowers for free, just because he could. It was the kind of street that doesn't make the news. The kind you only hear about when something goes wrong. In the center of it all, at 14 Sycamore Court, sat the house that had anchored the street for 31 years. A 2-story colonial, cream with green shutters, with a wide front porch and a screened back porch, and in the front yard, something that stopped every first-time visitor in their tracks. A garden. Not a garden like your grandmother's flower beds. A garden, a full, painstaking, sacred arrangement of plants and stones and small bronze markers, arranged in 4 careful rows along the front of the property. Roses in deep red, irises in purple and gold, yellow tulips that came back every April without fail, a small American flag at the center, flanked by stone birdbath and a hand-carved wooden post with a single engraved line. They are not gone, they are here. People slowed down when they passed that garden. They didn't always know why. The man who tended that garden was named Raymond Joseph Kowalski. Master Sergeant Raymond Joseph Kowalski, United States Army, retired. Served from 1979 to 2003. 24 years, 3 deployments: West Germany during the Cold War's last shiver, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm in 1990 and 1991, and a final tour in the early chaos of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003 that ended with a Humvee, a roadside device, and a left knee that never worked quite right again. He was 63 years old in the spring of 2019, 5'10", with the kind of posture that never fully left a man who'd spent 2 decades standing at attention. Gray hair, cut short not from vanity but from habit. Hands like geography, rough, mapped with veins, permanently calloused from decades of equipment, tools, and soil. After his medical retirement in 2003, Raymond had come back to Harrowfield. Back to the house he'd bought with his wife, Gloria, in 1988, back when he was a young staff sergeant with a new wife, a used pickup truck, and a sense that this was the place they'd grow old together. Gloria died of ovarian cancer in 2011. Raymond never sold the house. He told his daughter Denise, who lived in Cincinnati with her family, that the house still smelled like Gloria in the mornings. Denise didn't argue. Raymond's life by 2019 had found a kind of rhythm that suited him. He woke at 5:30 without an alarm. He made strong coffee, real coffee, the kind that took time, and drank it on the back porch while the birds sorted themselves out for the day. He drove a 2008 Ford F-150 with 180,000 miles on it and no intention of replacing it. He volunteered at the VFW post on Tuesdays. He coached youth baseball in the spring. He read history books, the thick kind with footnotes. And every morning, before the coffee was even finished, he tended the garden. That garden had started small the year after Gloria passed. A rosebush first, a deep red Queen Elizabeth variety she'd always loved, then another. Then the irises, which had belonged to a soldier named Corporal Deshaun Whitmore, 22 years old, killed by mortar fire outside Kuwait City on February 25, 1991. Raymond had gotten the iris bulbs from Deshaun's mother, Mrs. Eunice Whitmore of Cleveland, Ohio, who had pressed them into Raymond's hands at the funeral and said, "He loved these, take them, grow them somewhere good." Over the years, the garden grew. Each plant had a story, each marker had a name. 14 soldiers, men and women Raymond had served alongside, eaten beside, laughed with, and in some cases held while they died, were remembered in that small rectangle of Ohio soil. The neighbors knew what it was. They'd never been told officially, but they knew. People left flowers sometimes, anonymously. A Gold Star mother from 2 streets over had come by once and stood at the garden's edge for a long time without saying anything. Raymond never made a scene of it, never asked for recognition. He just kept it watered, kept it weeded, kept it alive. He had one small vanity, a slight one. He kept a framed photograph on his fireplace mantel, himself aged 32, standing with 6 other soldiers in the Saudi desert, squinting against the sun, everyone grinning despite the heat. He was holding a coffee thermos. Someone had written across the bottom in black marker, "The 7 Desert Storm, 1990. 5 of the 7 were in that garden. Now let me tell you about the house next door. Number 12 Sycamore Court had been empty for 7 months when the moving trucks arrived in late April 2019. 2 trucks, full size, hired movers in uniforms, not the borrowed pickup truck kind. Following the trucks was a pearl white 2021 Range Rover Sport, technically a 2021 model and a 2019 Spring, which is the kind of thing that happens when you have a dealership connection and enough money to pre-order a vehicle that hadn't fully hit showrooms yet. The woman who stepped out of that Range Rover was named Vivienne Ashford-Crane. 41 years old, divorced twice. The second divorce had settled for what sources close to the proceedings described as a number with a lot of zeros. She had moved to Harrowfield of all places because her lifestyle coach, yes, she had a lifestyle coach, had told her that intentional community living in mid-tier markets was the path toward authentic grounding. In practice, this meant Vivienne wanted a house large enough to host her social events, cheap enough to not feel like a downgrade, and located somewhere she could feel like the most important person on the street. She had found all 3 at 12 Sycamore Court. Her background was what polite people call entrepreneurial and what honest people call complicated. She had launched a lifestyle brand called Vivienne Crane Curated Candles Wellness Products, a podcast called Living at Full Volume that had peaked at number 47 on the Apple Wellness chart and had been slipping ever since. She had 68,000 Instagram followers and checked that number at least 4 times a day. The first red flag appeared before the moving trucks were even unloaded. Raymond was on his porch when Vivienne's SUV pulled in. He stood, as he always did for new neighbors, walked to the edge of his property and raised a hand in greeting. Vivienne looked at him over the roof of her Range Rover. She looked at his house. She looked at the garden. She lowered her sunglasses. And she said, loudly enough for the movers to hear, "Is that some kind of community garden thing? Does the HOA know about that?" Raymond kept his expression neutral. "It's my personal garden, ma'am. Welcome to the neighborhood." She looked at it for another moment, the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they've already decided they don't like. Well, she said, and went inside. The first real incident happened 11 days later, a warm Tuesday evening in early May, the kind of evening where you can smell the neighbor's grill and it makes you feel good about the world. Raymond was in the backyard, repairing a section of his fence when he heard it. Music. Not music from a party, not music from a cookout. Music from a system, a Sonos outdoor speaker setup that Vivienne had installed along her side fence, pumping a playlist of deep bass electronic tracks at a volume that rattled the glass in Raymond's back porch windows. He waited. 9 o'clock still going. 10 o'clock. At 10:15, Raymond walked to his front porch, picked up the coffee thermos he kept there out of habit, and walked next door. He knocked. Vivienne answered in a silk robe, phone in hand, glass of Prosecco balanced in the other. Raymond introduced himself properly. Raymond Kowalski. His house, 14 years. He caught himself 31 years. He just wanted to flag the music volume. He had an early morning. He suspected some of the other neighbors might as well. Vivienne looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said in a tone that made clear she was not. "I didn't realize this street had a noise curfew." "There's a municipal ordinance," Raymond said, pleasant as a Sunday morning. 10 p.m. I'm not trying to make trouble, just wanted to mention it neighbor to neighbor before it becomes anything official. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Listen, I can tell you've been here a long time, and that's really sweet, but I'm not going to adjust my entire lifestyle because of what the previous residents decided was normal, okay? I hope you have a good night." She closed the door. The music continued until 11:47 p.m. Raymond went inside, opened a notebook, a standard composition notebook, the black and white kind, and wrote the date, the time, and 2 sentences describing exactly what had happened. He'd started keeping that notebook on his second deployment. Old habit, he'd never found a reason to stop. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to be completely reasonable with someone who has already decided you're beneath them? Someone who looked at your patience and mistook it for weakness? Drop a comment below. Tell me about a time you took the high road with someone who didn't deserve it. Because what you're about to hear, this is exactly that kind of story. May became June, June became July. And the notebook filled up. May 14th, Vivienne's landscaping crew blew clippings directly onto Raymond's driveway and front garden. 3 iris stems were broken. Raymond photographed the damage and called the crew's company. The crew lead apologized. Vivienne did not. June 2nd, a black Cadillac XT5, belonging to one of Vivienne's regular dinner guests, parked across Raymond's driveway for 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon. Raymond called the non-emergency police line. An officer came, ran the plates, and left a notice. The Cadillac was moved 2 hours later. The guest, relaying Vivienne's apparent sentiments, called Raymond uptight as he walked back to his car. June 19th, Vivienne filed a complaint with the Harrowfield Residential Association, not an HOA, but a loose neighborhood organization, claiming that Raymond's garden created a tripping hazard due to uneven stone placement and constituted an unofficial public installation without proper permits. The association's volunteer coordinator, a retired schoolteacher named Bet Samuels, called Raymond to let him know. "I told her it was a private garden on private property," Bet said, "and that we had no jurisdiction." She used the word lawsuit 3 times in 4 minutes. Raymond thanked Bet and wrote it all down. June 30th, Raymond's mailbox, a plain black standard mount box, nothing fancy, was knocked clean off its post. Fresh tire tracks in the soft ground beside the road, consistent width with a Range Rover Sport. Raymond photographed the tracks, photographed the mailbox, and filed a police report. No charges were brought, insufficient evidence. He replaced the mailbox. He installed his first camera. July 8th, Vivienne began posting on her Instagram, not Harrowfield specific but pointed. Moving to a quiet neighborhood doesn't mean surrendering to other people's aesthetic choices. And neighbors who use their front yards as personal museums should understand that not everyone shares their vision. 41 comments, a handful of angry face emojis. Raymond's daughter Denise saw the posts and called him furious. Raymond told her he had it handled. He installed his second camera. Then the third. By the end of July, Raymond had 4 cameras, front yard, side gate, back porch, and driveway, all synced to a laptop in his spare bedroom, all recording in 1080p. All time-stamped. He also made a call to his county assessor's office. A quiet call, an information-only call. He asked about property lines, about survey records, about a particular stretch of land between number 12 and number 14 Sycamore Court. What the county assessor told him was interesting. Raymond wrote that down too, in a separate notebook, a red one. August 12, 2019. A Monday, hot 91 degrees by noon, the kind of Ohio summer heat that sits on your shoulders like a wool coat. Raymond had driven to the VFW post that morning, monthly planning meeting for the fall fundraiser. He was gone 3 hours. He came home at 11:45. He turned onto Sycamore Court and slowed to a stop. Something was wrong. It took him 3 full seconds to understand what he was seeing. The garden. Vivienne's Range Rover, the pearl white one, was parked half on the sidewalk, half on Raymond's front yard. The right rear tire had gone directly through the front row of the garden. The bronze markers, small, modest, stamped with names, were scattered across the lawn like discarded receipts. 3 of the rose bushes were flat. The center stone had been cracked down the middle. The hand-carved wooden post, "They are not gone. They are here," lay in the grass face down, the words hidden. The flag was still standing, somehow. Vivienne was at her own front door, speaking into her phone, laughing about something. She glanced at Raymond's truck as he pulled in, made brief eye contact, turned back to her conversation. Raymond stepped out of his truck. He stood at the edge of what remained of the garden. He looked at the scattered bronze markers. He bent slowly, knee protesting, and picked one up. CPL Deshaun Whitmore, KIA 25 Feb 1991. He held it for a moment. Then he set it carefully on the front step. He went inside. He closed the door. Mrs. Patricia Aucaffer from number 4 had seen the whole thing from her kitchen window. She called the police immediately, without Raymond asking. She stood in her driveway for 20 minutes, arms crossed, watching Vivienne's door until a squad car arrived. Vivienne told the responding officer it was an accident. She'd misjudged the curb. She offered to contribute to repairs. The officer, a young man named Deputy Kramer, took her statement, took Raymond's statement, took photographs, and filed a report. He told Raymond that given the circumstance, it was most likely a civil matter. Raymond nodded. "I understand," he said. "Thank you for coming." He closed the door again. Deputy Kramer sat in his cruiser for a full minute before driving away. He'd noticed the names on the bronze markers. He filed a thorough report. "Now, here's what I want you to understand about Raymond Kowalski. He was not a man who broke. Men like Raymond had been tried by things that would have broken most people twice over. He had carried soldiers. He had written letters to mothers. He had come home from war and buried his wife and kept his lawn mowed and kept his flag flying and kept the names of the dead alive in the Ohio soil. He was not going to break over Vivienne Ashford-Crane. But he was done being quiet. Direct hit if you think Raymond Kowalski is just going to file another police report and go back to his porch. You've never met a man who's been patient his entire life and finally decided he's been patient enough. Stay with me. Here's what nobody knew at the time. Nobody on Sycamore Court, nobody in Harrowfield, not Deputy Kramer, not the Harrowfield Residential Association, and certainly not Vivienne Ashford-Crane. Raymond Kowalski had not simply been an infantry master sergeant. From 1994 to 2001, between his Gulf War service and his final Iraq deployment, Raymond had served with the Army's 902nd Military Intelligence Brigade, counterintelligence specifically. His work had been unglamorous and largely classified, but it had given him something that never left a man who truly learned it. The patience to let someone destroy themselves and the knowledge of how to document every step of the process. That was detail number 1. Detail number 2. Raymond's oldest Army friend, a man named Thomas Bear Bearden, who had stood next to Raymond in that photograph on the mantle, who had been in the Saudi desert in 1990 and had pulled Raymond out of a ditch in Kuwait in 1991, was now a senior investigator with the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. They spoke on the phone every Sunday. Raymond had mentioned Vivienne Ashford-Crane to Bear 3 weeks ago, not to start anything, just to talk. Bear had gone quiet on the phone for a moment, then he'd said, "Ray, that name just triggered something on my end, give me a few days." Detail number 3, and this is the one that mattered most in the immediate term. Remember the call Raymond made to the county assessor's office in late July. The survey records showed something that had apparently been buried in paperwork for decades. The actual recorded property line between 12 and 14 Sycamore Court ran not along the wooden fence line that currently existed, but 14 inches to the east. 14 inches. In practical terms, a section of Vivienne Ashford-Crane's newly installed privacy fence, the 7-foot cedar fence she'd had put up in June, the one her landscapers had driven stakes into without pulling a permit, sat 14 inches onto Raymond's legal property. The fence was illegal. The encroachment was documented. And Raymond had a licensed surveyor's report to prove it, ordered quietly, completed on August 1st, 11 days before the garden incident. He'd been planning to offer Vivienne the chance to correct it voluntarily. That offer was now off the table. The week after the garden was destroyed, Raymond made 3 phone calls. The first was to a civil attorney in Columbus named Ellen Park, who specialized in property law and had a particular reputation for not settling. The second was to the Franklin County Building Department, reporting the unpermitted fence and the encroachment. The third was to Bear Bearden at the Ohio AG's office. Bear called back the following morning. His voice had the particular calm of a man who has very bad news for someone and is not sorry about it. "Ray," he said, "Vivienne Ashford-Crane's lifestyle company, Vivienne Crane Curated, is currently the subject of a consumer fraud investigation. They've been selling wellness supplements with health claims that aren't FDA approved. There are over 300 consumer complaints filed across 6 states. We've been building the case for 4 months." A pause. "Her company's registered business address," Bear said, "is 12 Sycamore Court, Harrowfield, Ohio." Raymond looked at his coffee cup. "Well," he said. "Yeah," said Bear. "Now let me pause here because I want you to appreciate what's happening." Vivienne Ashford-Crane had picked a fight with a retired military intelligence specialist who had a licensed surveyor's report in his desk drawer, 4 cameras recording her property since July, a 15-month documentation notebook, and a personal friend who happened to be investigating her company for federal consumer fraud. She didn't know any of this. She was, at this exact moment, posting a video to her Instagram about her new outdoor entertainment setup. You see, folks, that is what we call a catastrophic intelligence failure. September 3rd, 2019, a Tuesday. The kind of early September morning where summer is still hanging on by its fingernails. 71 degrees at 8 a.m., the air thick with dew, the maple trees on Sycamore Court just beginning to talk about turning color. Raymond was on his back porch. He had rebuilt the front garden over the previous 3 weeks. Not alone, Patricia Ackafer had come over with gloves. Frank Merritt had helped reset the center stone. The Delgado boys had raked. Someone to this day nobody admitted who had left a fresh Queen Elizabeth rosebush on Raymond's doorstep with a note that said "only for the garden." 2 of the bronze markers had needed to be remounted. Raymond had done that himself, early on a Sunday morning, alone. The wooden post stood again. "They are not gone, they are here." At 8:12 a.m., Raymond heard tires on Sycamore Court. Not 1 car. 3. He heard Vivienne's front door open. He didn't move. What happened next? He heard from Patricia Ackafer, who was watching from her front window, and from the police report filed that morning, and from Bear Bearden's account shared later. 2 vehicles from the Ohio Attorney General's office, 1 from the Franklin County Sheriff. 1 unmarked sedan that belonged, Bear later confirmed, to the Federal Trade Commission, which had joined the Ohio investigation 2 weeks prior. Vivienne Ashford-Crane opened her front door at 8:14 a.m. wearing a cream silk robe, holding a latte she had just made with her $4,000 espresso machine. She was, according to Patricia's account, mid-yawn. She looked at the cars. She looked at the people getting out of the cars. She looked at the documents in their hands. Vivienne Ashford-Crane, the lead investigator, said. She did not answer. They served her. The documents included a civil lawsuit filed by Raymond Kowalski's attorney Ellen Park, citing property damage, intentional destruction of a memorial, trespass, harassment, and the unpermitted fence encroachment, seeking $212,000 in compensatory damages, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages to be determined. A Franklin County Building Department notice ordering the immediate removal of the unpermitted fence within 14 days or face daily fines of $500. And this was Bear's, an official investigative demand letter from the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. requiring the preservation of all business records, correspondence, and financial documents related to Vivienne Crane Curated, LLC, pending a formal consumer fraud investigation that had expanded to include the FTC. They were there for 40 minutes. The sheriff's deputy issued a separate formal warning regarding the August 12th vehicle-on-property incident, noting that the police report had been reviewed and that any further property damage or harassment could result in criminal charges. At no point during any of this did Raymond Kowalski step off his back porch. At 8:51 a.m., Patricia Acaffer watched all three vehicles leave. She looked across the street. Vivienne was standing in her doorway, robe open, latte in hand, standing very, very still. Patricia later said that she had never in her life seen someone physically shrink standing up. Then she said, "I looked over at Ray's house and his back porch light was on, and I thought he knew exactly what was happening and he didn't even need to watch." Raymond was on his third cup of coffee by then. He poured a fourth. Ellen Park's lawsuit, by the time it concluded the following March, after Vivienne's attorney had attempted 4 motions to dismiss, all denied, settled for $287,000 in Raymond's favor. The punitive damages alone were $75,000, specifically tied to the destruction of a documented veterans memorial. The fence came down in 16 days. The FTC case against Vivienne Crane Curated, LLC, resolved 18 months later. Civil penalties, $430,000. Mandatory refunds to consumers, $1.1 million. The company was dissolved. Total financial consequence to Vivienne Ashford-Crane between the civil suit, the business penalties, and the legal fees across both matters, approximately $2.3 million. For 2 weeks after the September 3rd visit, Sycamore Court was quieter than usual. People were careful with their voices. There was a charged kind of stillness, the way a room feels after a very loud noise has just stopped. Vivienne did not come outside much. Her Instagram went dark for 11 days, an eternity for someone who had posted daily for 3 years. When she did post again, it was a vague, unlocated image of a sunset with a caption about seasons of change and protecting your peace. The comments section was less sympathetic than she appeared to have expected. The cedar fence came down on a Wednesday. A work crew arrived at 7 a.m. with power tools. Raymond was in his front yard when they started. He watched for a moment, nodded, and went back to weeding. The accurate property line was marked with small stakes and orange survey tape. On his legal property, Raymond planted 2 new irises. On a Thursday evening in late September, Deputy Kramer drove by Sycamore Court on his way home, not on duty, just his regular route. He slowed in front of number 14, looked at the garden, looked at the new irises and the restored markers. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. On October 14, 2019, a gray and perfect Ohio autumn Monday, a moving truck arrived at 12 Sycamore Court. It was not the same kind of moving truck as before. It was a mid-size box truck, not 2 full-size ones. There were no movers in uniforms, just 2 men Vivienne had apparently found on short notice. She carried some boxes herself. None of the neighbors came outside. Nobody waved goodbye. Patricia Acaffer was asked later if she felt bad. She took a long time to answer. "I felt," she said finally, "like the street exhaled." The years that followed were good ones on Sycamore Court. Number 12 was purchased in early 2020 by a young couple, David and Anna Restrepo. David was a physical therapist. Anna was a nurse. They had a 5-year-old named Cora who immediately fell in love with Raymond's front garden and demanded, within 2 weeks of moving in, to know the story behind it. Raymond sat with Cora on his front step one afternoon in April 2020 and told her. He told her about Deshaun Whitmore and the irises, about Maria Sandoval, 24 years old, killed in Iraq in 2003, for whom he'd planted the yellow tulips because her mother had said yellow was Maria's favorite color, about the others, about what the garden meant, about why it mattered to remember people's names. Cora listened without fidgeting, which Raymond found remarkable in a 5-year-old. "Do they know you remember them?" she asked. Raymond thought about that. I think so, he said. Cora became the garden's unofficial assistant. She helped water on weekends. She was very serious about it. As for Vivienne Ashford-Crane, after leaving Harrowfield, she relocated briefly to Scottsdale, Arizona, then to a smaller rental property in Columbus. The FTC settlement was finalized in 2021. Her lifestyle brand ceased operations entirely. Her podcast was quietly removed from all platforms. Her Instagram, once at 68,000 followers, sat at approximately 4,200 by late 2022, mostly holdouts and bots. She gave an interview to a small lifestyle blog in 2021 in which she described her time in Harrowfield as a period of forced realignment. She did not mention the garden. Raymond Kowalski won the Ohio VFW District 5 Community Service Award in the fall of 2021, partly for his role in preserving and expanding the memorial garden, which, following some local newspaper coverage of the lawsuit and its outcome, had become something of a quiet landmark. The Gold Star family from 2 towns overwrote the VFW a letter specifically mentioning the garden. The Harrowfield Beacon ran a half-page feature. Raymond was embarrassed by all of it, in the way that decent people are embarrassed by deserved attention. The garden by 2022 had 16 markers instead of 14. He'd added 2 more soldiers he'd known, whose families had reached out after the newspaper story. The center post still stood. They are not gone, they are here. The roses came back every spring. They always did. You know, I think about Raymond Kowalski sometimes, about what he did and, more importantly, what he didn't do. He didn't yell, he didn't confront, he didn't post on Nextdoor or make threats or let his anger turn him into something ugly. He just documented, waited, made calls, let the truth do what the truth does when you give it enough time and enough evidence. He had learned that in the army. He'd learned it in counterintelligence, where the whole job is patience, watching, recording, waiting for the moment when the other side's confidence finally outruns their caution. And he had learned it in grief, in 31 years of living in a house that still smelled like his wife in the mornings, in the practice of going out every day to tend a garden full of names, to keep alive the memory of people the world had mostly moved on from. That kind of practice teaches you something about permanence, about what lasts and what doesn't. Vivienne Ashford-Crane had 68,000 followers and a lifestyle brand and a pearl-white Range Rover, and she looked at a veteran's memorial garden and saw an aesthetic problem. Raymond Kowalski had a composition notebook and 4 cameras and a friend who owed him a debt of loyalty that went back to a ditch in Kuwait in 1991. You see, folks, there is a version of this world where money and arrogance win, where the loud person drowns out the quiet one, where the person with the expensive lawyer and the casual cruelty walks away with no consequence. This was not that world. This was Sycamore Court, Harrowfield, Ohio. And on Sycamore Court, the people who mattered most were the ones who showed up, who shoveled driveways without being asked, who left food on doorsteps during hard weeks, who replanted what had been destroyed and stood together while the moving truck took the wrong kind of neighbor away. So let me leave you with this. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Never mistake patience for surrender. Never mistake the stillness of a veteran standing at the edge of a broken garden for the stillness of someone who has given up. Some men go to war, some men come home. And some of those men, the ones who have carried fallen soldiers, who have written the letters, who have learned what it costs to keep a promise, those men understand something that the rest of us are still trying to learn. They understand that honor is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to last. And on a quiet cul-de-sac in Ohio, in a garden full of names that most of the world has forgotten, it does. Every single spring. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.